Hey YouTube, Kira Qualia here, bringing you all my Cardfight Vanguard Prison deck profile for post-Dragon Masquerade. We got a couple new cards for the Brantgate Prison deck, a deck that focuses on setting up your prison set order and then being able to place all the many different units that your opponent has, whether it be in their hand, their field, their soul, their drop zone, into this prison to then power up your many different battle princesses or other Brantgate units that you have on the field, thanks to that, and with our main grade 3 being Seraph Snow and her evolved form being the Seraph Pure Light for all the added pressure that you can get in the deck to use against your opponent. So let's go ahead and get started with the deck profile. So we'll go ahead and start off with the ride deck with our starter being Aurora Battle Princess, Ruby Red. When rode upon, if you went second, draw a card. The standard draw power for our starters in D format with our grade 1 being Aurora Battle Princess, Kyanite Blue. When this unit is placed on Vanguard, search your deck for up to one prison card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and shuffle your deck. So this searches out our one of Prison Galactolus. Being able to have this card set up in our order zone is the main play of the entire deck. And also with this card having the activation requirements needed for us to use the prison with our grade 2 being Aurora Battle Princess, Reset Pink. When placed on Vanguard, your opponent chooses a card from their hand and imprisons it in your prison. So they can get the card back thanks to the prison's specifications, but it still takes away a resource they may have had in their hand for them to use against you, with our main grade 3 being Aurora Battle Princess, Seraph Snow. It has the additional +10 power and drive +1 if your opponent has one or more cards in their prison, then 3 or more with the drive +1, and just being able to once per turn on Vanguard Circle, choose 2 of your opponent's rear guards and imprison them in the prison. We're only running the 1 copy though, because you do want to get into your grade 4 copy as soon as possible for Seraph Pure Light. But before we get to the grade 4 lineup, we'll get to the only order that we run in the deck, and that is Galaxy Central Prison Galactolus. You rest one of your units to play this card. So if you go first with your grade 1, you'll rest your Vanguard, and when this unit is put into the card is put into the order zone, soul charge 3, and when your opponent can normal call a rear guard, they perform the following. They can soul blast 1. If they do, they choose one of their imprison cards, call it to rear, or they can counter blast 1 and choose 2, getting rid of their own resources to get out the many different rear guards or units they had that were imprisoned in the prison. With our grade 4, we're running 4 copies of Aurora Fierce Princess, Seraph Pure Light. When this unit is placed on Vanguard, counter blast 1, soul blast 1, card with Seraph and its card name. Your opponent chooses 2 cards, each from their hand, rear guards, and soul, and imprisons them in your prison. So that could be up to 6 cards if your opponent fully has those numbers in their hand, rear guards, or soul, and then can boost up the power of this card as well. On Vanguard Circle, during your turn, all your front row get +5 for every 2 of your opponent's cards imprisoned in the prison, and if 10 or more cards in prison, all your front row get critical +1. So the fact that it's all of your front row just adds to the pressure of this card, being able to just hit for bigger and bigger numbers, and then just have pressure so your opponent might not be able to have any of your units attacks, whether it be your Vanguard or your rear guard, hit into your opponent, especially if you get a critical trigger as well, or the over trigger. And for the other grade 3s, we're running 3 of the new Aurora Battle Princess, Penetrate Aquas. When this unit is placed on rear, if your opponent chooses a card from their drop zone and imprisons it in your prison, and on rear guard or guard circle, if 2 or more of your opponent's cards are imprisoned in your prison, this unit gets +5 power, shield +10, and for the battle that this unit attacked, when your opponent would call cards from their hand to guard, they must call 2 or more cards at the same time. So having also a guard restriction card just adds for the pressure that Seraph Pure Light can provide for your rear guards, and then a guard restriction on top of that means if your opponent were to try and save sentinels for your rear guards, they're going to be out of luck since they'll have to call the sentinel along with 1 additional card. For the grade 2s, we're running 4 copies of Aurora Battle Princess, Perio Turquoise. It's the power minus unit when your opponent releases one of their units from the prison. Being able to, when it's placed, it gets -5,000 till end of turn, so it almost makes it not worth it for your opponent to try and get the cards back from the prison, since it's just going to have a minus power to begin with. And during your turn, if 2 or more cards are imprisoned in your prison, this unit gets +5,000 power. So you have your opponent's card power to also allow this card to power up while weakening your opponent's units also to begin with 4 copies of the Aurora Battle Princess, Accused Masquerade. This has become a promo that's more readily available, so I decided to include it with this update of the deck as well. When placed on rear from hand, Soul Blast 1, and your opponent imprisons the top card of the deck in the prison face up. Then if 2 or more cards of your opponents are imprisoned in your prison, it gets +5 to end of turn. So this just takes from your opponent's deck for you to use for the prison imprisonment, taking it so even if your opponent tries to not call any cards or set up any cards in their soul, and also just be able to keep on building up that power in your prison regardless of if they want to go along with any of the play styles you have also. And for some of the lower numbers for the grade 2s, 2 copies of Aurora Battle Princess Agra Rouge. On rear guard or guard circle, if 2 or more of your opponent's cards are imprisoned in your prison, it gets +5 power and defense +10 or shield +10,000. And when placed on rear, you can Soul Blast 1, choose one of your opponent's front row rear guards, and imprison it in the prison. So you have power and shield power, making it for a pretty good defensive card to intercept against your opponent using this card, but also having the 15k power on its own when you have it on the field, but gaining more and more power thanks to Seraph Pure Light as well. And lastly, for the grade 2s, 2 copies of Aurora Battle Princess Cup Spring. When placed on rear, your opponent chooses a card from their hand and imprisons it, and if it was imprisoned, your opponent draws a card. So this could take away a potential Sentinel that your opponent was holding on to. If they only have a couple cards left in their hand, they'll draw into other cards, but you took away from a card that they potentially needed to guard against your bigger attack involving all of your Aurora Battle Princesses on the field. Moving on now to the grade 1s. We're only running 2 copies of the new Aurora Battle Princess Grenade Marietta. It's a card in testing. When this unit is placed on rear, you may choose one of your opponent's cards imprisoned in your prison. If you do, your opponent puts that card on the bottom of their deck, chooses a grade 0 card from their drop zone, imprisons it in your prison, and this unit gets +5 power until end of turn. So this card could take away from a card that your opponent may have needed or wanted to get back the following turn. So just with the choice, you choose one of your opponent's cards in prison, so you take away that card from your opponent that you imprison that they may try to get back and reuse the following turn, and in exchange put a grade 0 that they really can't do as much with in the order zone when they want to release it. With the other grade 1s being 4 copies of Hyperspeed Robo Shovel Stud. Once per turn on rear, you can Counter Blast 1, Soul Blast 1, and choose one of your opponent's rear guards and imprison it in your prison. And if 3 or more are imprisoned in the prison, you draw a card. So it's draw power, but once again, just another easy once per turn since it doesn't have to be placed like some of the other cards that don't even give us an additional plus in imprisonment for the order zone to use. With the last of the grade 1s being the Sentinel, which is Violet Dragon. If you wanted to run Elementaria Sanctitude, really not much room for it in the grade 4 lineup. That's why we stuck to the 4 Violet Dragons for the Sentinel lineup, with our trigger lineup being the 8 critical. We have 4 of the Aurora Battle Princess Luris Yellow, but if you wanted to run the additional copies of Decker Cop, you could just take out the 2 copies of Barbazode. This card just helps for the trigger lineup with the added pressure for the criticals, along with the pressure that Seraph Pure Light provides also, with the next trigger being the Draw Spot Ameliorate Connector for the additional 5k shield. And for the heals, we're running 2 of the Trees Green Aurora Battle Princess and 2 of the ability Extra Critical +1 Obifold heal as well, with our over trigger being the Elder Breath for the doubled power. If you reveal this off a full pressured Seraph Pure Light, it's all the more scary when going up against your opponent. But that is it for the deck profile. I hope you all enjoy. Once again, big thanks to my buddy Jim for letting me borrow his prison deck for the video. And as always, until next time, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. And Kira Qualia out.